So just for the sake of people listening, I'm here with Chris. I pronounce your last name Caivano?
Perfect.
Look at me.
Well done.
I get an A for effort.
Yeah,
Um,
we're
yeah,
guessing well.
it's good to be with you again. We're taking this time to get to know some of the people who are joining us on this growing through what you go through multi-part curious adventure. You came to us through one of our lead facilitators, Brian Traskos. You and I had an opportunity to talk, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, the idea today is just to get to know you a bit better and really, in a way, what's kind of curious in your life? What kind of curious questions are percolating in your experience, in your mind, in your world? I'd also like to get a deeper sense of, what brings you to this kind of experience? How does that connect to your world, the things you do, the people that you support through your work? So maybe we just start in the most curious place possible. I'm interested in knowing like what's curious in your experience these days. What are the kinds of questions that seem unanswered in your own heart that you may take with you into this kind of experience?
Hmm. Well, the thing that's on my mind and that I'm curious about is this. I am at a point in my life now where I don't have to work, but I love what I'm doing so much that I want to. I want to work. I want to keep teaching Qigong and keep teaching dance and what I do is I use different kinds of movement to help people heal and grow and find more joy, or specifically in the Qigong language, to transform whatever energy they're feeling into a positive, healthy, enlivening energy, which I think that's such a great concept. And it's called inner alchemy. So it has a little aspect of magic to it. Like in the springtime, the energy of the spring is associated with the liver, and it's the energy of growth and creativity and generosity and kindness. And if that energy isn't flowing, it manifests as frustration and stress and anger. And I was told a long time ago when I first started training with my teacher to get certified, I said I had a lot of arthritis in my hands and fingers. He said, "Oh, that's liver energy." So
Mm.
ever since then, I've been, what's stuck? What am I frustrated about? So I'm at this interesting place in my life where I both have total freedom to do what I want, uh, and I want to balance that with not overdoing it and getting stressed. And
Mm.
it's a brand new situation for me because I've been self-employed forever. First as a dance teacher and then as a movement therapist and now as a little bit of everything. And I want to find out how to get balance in my life.
Mm.
And you probably can relate to this. I have a feeling you've created a lot. You're your own boss in many ways. And somebody once said to me, nobody's a harder boss than yourself.
Mhm.
So I recently took a vacation, just got back, and I'm still feeling so enlivened and inspired and joyful and full of ideas. And I feel like I'm coming to the end here. I feel like I need some open space. Like I want to give myself a sabbatical. And I told a friend that recently, and she said, "But you don't work for anybody." So I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I can't take it. Uh, I can't take 6 months off." So I'm kind of struggling with this. I love what I do, but I don't want to do it too much. I need some space to really be as open and creative as possible.
Yeah, you seem to have run into the proverbial paradox, which is that you're asking your boss for some time off and you realize there's no boss.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, yeah, that sounds almost like what we might call like a transition,
Hmm.
like a move from one way of holding your experience. I must do this, I'm compelled to do this, this is kind of a requirement, right? Probably for your own sustenance and sustainability and just being able to live and kind of those early stage Maslow needs, those safety needs, those,
Mhm.
and now transitioning into this place of a re-understanding of work and the meaning of work that doesn't have those same tentacles, those safety meeting basic need tentacles as much maybe than it
Right.
did in the past. What do you do when you're in a transition? So what's interesting about transitions is we could say like we're moving from the land of the known to the land of the unknown. And that's what makes them notably difficult, right? Because how do you know what you don't know? I don't know this world of working without all these kind of fettered, all of these strings attached in a way. What do you tend to do in your experience? I'm sure you obviously have a lot of clients as well who show up to you with a lot of unknowns, right? They're like, I want to move into something, and I kind of have a vague understanding of what that something is, but in a way, I don't really know what it is because if I knew what it was, I'd be in that thing. What do you tend to do when you don't know what to do?
Uh, go for a walk in nature, go for a bike ride. I move. I get outside and I move.
Yeah.
Um, it's like a way of meditating for me.
Mm.
I don't go to meditation when I'm in those, unless it's really something feeling very acute when I really need to center. But I usually just I walk. I walk and think and uh, see what comes up.
Why those, what draws you into that kind of action? Why that?
Mhm. I think it's a way for me to manage my energy because I've got a lot of physical energy. And when I don't have a lot of energy, when I feel tired, I'm almost like, oh, there's something's wrong. It's just came up as I was talking to you about that. So walking and breathing, it's a way to keep things moving and churning. So maybe I can let go of the things I'm holding on to habitually, just sort of vibrate them out, walking, looking around. Maybe something will come into mind.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that creative process of just practicing being open.
Yeah. It sounds almost like a shake it off a bit,
Yeah.
like
Probably.
yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm a writer and I used to journal all the time, but now that I'm writing my newsletter once a week, it's like I get my writing yayas satisfied a couple hours every Monday. So I haven't been journaling, but that's another good way to
Mm.
sort of connect to something I might not be aware of that's just below the surface.
I mean, a lot of your work is in kind of the migration and movement and transformation of energies, or let's just say the flows of energies. And you do, it sounds like a lot of your practice is grounded in kind of somatic work or movement work. What do you notice about people who show up to your practice who, like you, are trying to understand the migration of energy, something that maybe feels a bit bound up in something, right? So like you talked about being bound up in a way of thinking about work, or there's a container around it in a way, and that container maybe doesn't feel like it's serving you right now anymore, or you're outgrowing that container, whatever metaphor I guess works for you.
Mhm.
What do you notice about the people who show up to practice who are in similar states of flux, but feeling the sense of some of that energy being dammed up or held back in a way?
I'm really smiling because this is so interesting because no one ever asks me these questions. And I tell them, you're trying too hard. You don't have to try too hard. Just
Right.
trust and relax and let it flow.
What's the tr let's can we just let's hold I mean I want to hear I know it sounds like there's more but that's I think it's a really interesting point, this question of trying.
Mm.
What do you understand about trying? It's a really interesting idea because there's a popular idea in our culture that movement happens through willfulness,
Mm.
effortfulness, right? It's like there's a sense that it's a kind of willful activity. It's a pushing ahead. It's a getting ahead. It's a, like we frame a lot of things and let's call it an ambitious energy. And at the heart of that ambitious energy is there's a willfulness.
Mm.
So it's interesting that you say to your students or to your clients that maybe they're trying too hard. What's the relationship between trying too hard? Because you would think you would want to try as hard as you could. If the model was the more willful you are and the more determined you are, and the more things you throw at this problem, the more likely it is that it'll be resolved or will migrate or move to that next thing. You would think the instinctively the opposite advice would be like try harder, give 180%, go above and beyond. And yet you
Mhm.
instinctively you say to them, maybe you're trying too hard. That sounds a bit like a paradox. What is that?
Yeah, it is a paradox, like so much in Taoism and energy work. It's the trying actually creates a contraction
Hmm.
and slows down the flow of energy. And again, I hadn't thought of this, but in college when I was a dance major, um, we learned the language of dance, which was Laba notation, which was literally writing the steps on a staff. It's taking human movement and reducing it down to little square angles, and it was very, very unnatural. And the other thing that was based in something called, are you ready? Effort shape. I never thought of that. Effort shape. And now, so that's how a dancer's trained. That was the first 35, 40 years of my life. Now I'm learning that effort is often it's often counterproductive. And what I'm thinking is, in my mind, I'm always very, very obsessed with time. Every day feels too short. Every life feels too short. And I think that I have to step back and just trust the natural evolution. Things grow at their own speed. You don't pull a daffodil out of the ground, especially these days, right? So that's what I tell people. In fact, we call it the 70% rule. Use 70% of the effort you know you can expend and see what happens. And they love that. And I love it, but I forget to do it myself.
Hmm.
If I teach them and I say, okay, let's 70%, and they find, oh, I'm doing the shape, I'm doing the movement, but I feel better and I feel more. You actually start to physically warm up.
Yeah, there's this. I'm a golfer, and there's a similar idea in golf. They'll most, well, there's different schools of thought, but generically, they would say that you're at your most rhythmic when you're in your swing at about 80%.
Ah,
So there's space for
mm,
softness and strength of movement. There's other schools of thought that would say on a given day, your rhythm might be slightly different, and it's important to intuit your rhythm. So it is possible that you would go to the course or the practice range one day, and the pace of your swing, albeit it wouldn't dramatically change, but it might be a little bit more active. And on other days, it might be a little bit slower. And
and
part of the practice is just intuiting in that given moment, is there a sense of greater enthusiasm or is there a sense of greater softness that that day is inviting you into? And you can actually practice movement. Um, I went to a brilliant school called Vision 54, and they would have students do Tai Chi swings,
mm,
which are very, very, very difficult to do. So you would watch someone swing a golf club where the full swing might take like 5 minutes,
wow, yeah,
which is
wow.
which I can tell you is extremely difficult. But what's interesting about in slowing down is, as we know, both in the Taoist school and in other schools, is the quality of noticing speeds up, right? So the
Right.
quality of noticing elevates. What's interesting is when you slow down your golf swing to that rate, you begin to notice all the points of tension in your swing. They become much, much more because you can't but notice at any given movement of this arc of a process, which is what the golf swing is, where you hold the most tension.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah,
And
so it's interesting that it's interesting this Taoist principle of effortlessness, effortless action. It sounds like, and I can relate to what you're saying, that a lot of work for you for a lot of time was about the effortfulness.
mhm.
There was a clear intentionality to exert yourself with a view on moving from point A to point B, right? A point from having less to having more of, to having no safety to having safety, to all of these things that you were trying to create, earn, generate through your work. So work had a kind of generative function. It had an effortful function, right? And now it sounds like you're at a point in your life where you're moving towards now that that effortfulness or that outcome-based model of work is changing. What's my relationship to work now?
Yeah, because there's a little idea drifting like a cartoon bubble of some vaguely imagined new forms that I want to create. And I've just started to scratch at that a little bit, but it created a lot more work for me. Because again, I jumped into it. I said, I'm going to teach 6 weeks of this new kind of dance course. It was like, holy, how am I going to do this? I'm already teaching Qigong and I ended up being exhausted by it.
Yeah.
Right. So again, I see that I'm pushing too much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very I mean I know it well. It is a way of showing up to your experience where there's a sense of something is always pulling me. There's a pull, there's a force there. Doesn't feel like an inside force. It feels a bit like a habitual force. There's a kind of chronicity to it, or a nervousness about it, or a demandingness about it. And it's a hard one to shed. I mean, in all of the leadership work that we do, the coaching work, it's a very, very common angst that a lot of people show up with, the sense of the relentlessness of the call of work, of obligation, of meeting some commitment. It's very, very ever present.
Yeah, that's very true. And let me just mention before I forget, the thing that's pulling me the most and that I really don't have a clue how to handle is my enthusiasm about it.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm saying. It's like I don't have to do this, but I'm like, oh wow, wouldn't that be so much fun? I'm dying to, these people are asking me and they want to do it, and I want to do it. And so that's the thing, that's the pressure uh
Yeah.
on me. And it's not, it's completely self-imposed and it's coming from just, I think of a metaphor is when I was less than 5 years old, I was just barely walking. And I loved our neighbors across the street, Ivy Clausen, and I wanted to show her all my toys. And so I put all of my toys on a tray and carried them across the street and fell on her steps and cut my knee, and I still have the scar.
Mm,
But I think of that as a metaphor because I really wanted to do that.
yeah.
It was fun for me. And
Mm,
that's still a compulsion for me
mm.
that I've got to get a handle on.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier a dandelion, and I love that metaphor. Like you can't pull a dandelion to grow, because of course, if you pulled on it, you would uproot it. And I think that's true to life as well. Like we have to honor the changing tides.
Mm.
There's exerting force over the natural flow of things can actually lead to a lot of discordance. And we see that in our everyday work lives. A lot of people are force themselves through work, and of course that creates a whole set of imbalances. And I wonder, I mean, this is maybe a odd question, but do you think a dandelion is enthusiastic?
Oh yeah.
Wow. I wasn't expecting you to come to the table with what do you think if you're a dandelion, how do you understand enthusiasm as a dandelion?
Whee, there's the sun. Yay, it's time to grow. I love being a gardener. It's like, it's like, but they're patient. If there isn't sun, they hang out. There are no dandelions in our yard yet, but it's amazing when as the seasons change to watch nature. Just to me, it feels like a joyful propulsion
Yeah.
of growth. And then what they do also very well, these plants, is they just, when they're done, they're done. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah,
So,
they're very there's a sense of attunement.
yeah,
I mean, it's a very difficult one to understand because even in the Zen tradition, there's that well-known adage, chop wood, carry water.
yeah.
Um, of course, it's not chop wood to get some wood, to store it, to sell it, to make a profit, right? Like that's not the narrative. The narrative is chop wood, carry water. Where a lot of our day-to-day mindsets or thinking is we have a whole story about why we're chopping wood and why we're carrying water. And in fact, we're not even doing the activity anymore. We're just embroiled in the story of the activity, right?
Mm,
And anything that interferes with that is interruptive, right? Um, I posted this earlier, like one of the reasons we're so pulled out of the present is that we're living in representations of reality. We're not in touch with reality. We're living in our ideas about reality, and the ideas are the things that are so consuming. So it comes back to this conversation, the original curiosity you had about the story of work. There's this really compelling story of work that you've been carrying around a long time. It sounds very similar to my story about work or many other people I know story about work. And in many ways, retirement for some people is like, I'm so desperate to shed this story.
mm,
Oh, finally, I have permission to like dump this story, right? And now I'll move into this thing called retirement. That's kind of the antithesis of my previous story, which is work, 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 work. Yeah, it's interesting. The Taoists are so drawn to to understanding one's essence as nature and then to find attunement through that natural flow. And of course, nature becomes a great teacher of that. And you talk about a garden. Gardens are incredibly, maybe this is not a better word, but maybe metaphorically productive, right?
mhm.
Produce at a very, they just this wealth of production. And even if you leave a garden alone and don't tend to it, it will produce things. It may not produce things that you deem to be lovely or maybe what you wanted. I have an unattended to vegetable garden on my property that we haven't touched in like 2 or 3 years. It's burgeoning with stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so I'm like, what is that? And it's, nothing like we planted or, um, how do we, I think you're asking this really important question that I think a lot of people are also secretly asking themselves is, how do I grow effortlessly? What's the condition under which the kind of conditionless condition? Because we are growing. Your cells, everything in your experience is moving constantly, right? There's a metamorphosis always, always, always happening, right?
Mm,
There's nothing in your being that's static at all. Like you couldn't point to anything in your immediate reality that's not in some state of flux or movement.
yeah.
The problem with, you think the problem with growth, and maybe it comes back to this idea of work, that the target becomes too rigid, the expectation becomes too rigid, and that we lose sight of the depth and the breadth and the joy of just the migration itself, of the movement itself.
For sure, because I don't even have a target. That's where I'm at this wonderful place where I don't have any targets. I want to just be so open. I'll see what arises from my 50 years of working in the field, basically, as
Yeah.
a student. And then I think for me, the thing that's the biggest compulsion or tie to not just becoming a hermit in the woods for a while, which I'd love to do. And I've always wanted to do that since I was a little kid. It's always in a tree or making a little fort, or, I just love that. Um, but the thing that's pulling me is the relationships with other people, with my students.
Yeah.
I am so it's like a direct heart to heart connection, and they have even said to me, take more vacations. Or one of the students, God bless her, she said, we'll be here for you when you come back.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, I really needed to hear that. So to me, that's probably a problem in my own head,
Mm.
that if I remove myself from this I don't know what to call it. It's like I've been working on this pattern for 4 or 5 years since I've started teaching, 4 years since I've started teaching online of here I am, here's my schedule, this is the month I take off. If for me to break that, that's the great unknown.
Yeah.
And how long would I need to break it for? I mean, I just broke it for a week. It was fabulous, but what if and I have done it for a month, but that wasn't long enough because I knew at the end of the month I'd be back to my 3 times a week, 9:30 in the morning. So that's the great unknown. If I
Yeah.
broke it for 6 months.
Yeah, I hear like two really important questions in your mind, and they're questions that also percolate in me, and I hear them in others. Is there a way to travel without being preoccupied with the destination? Is one interesting question. Can one be wandering without a sense of aimlessness? I love this, wander and wonder are two very closely related animals.
Hmm.
And that's a when you're not habituated to, which is a bit of the chop wood carry water, right? Because it's in a way it's what we would say is all process. It's all process.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you could say at the end of it, I get the water and I get the wood, and so the wood becomes fire and it heats the home, and the water becomes something I ingest and it quenches my thirst. But the spirit in which it's done has nothing to do with that. It's just all process. And it's so counterculture. We just have no language in the West for this. We have no language, which is why I think a lot of us are drawn to the East because there's a more obvious language for being very, very process, energy, unfolding oriented.
And they even say that it's beyond language in the East.
Right, right. So it's almost, yeah. So it's like there is only experience. There's not
Right.
interpretation or the storytelling about experience.
It's that what you're describing, and it sounds so fantastic. To me, that is the ultimate mindfulness, to have no destination.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not, when you become the animal of destinations, when that becomes the central theme of your story, as we all know that experience, and I'm sure everyone listening will know that experience well, to shift into a process-oriented experience, to just simply chop wood, carry water, or as you say with the dandelion, to simply enthusiastically move in this kind of upward turning, and sometimes it's downward turning as well, depending on the season. To simply sunflower
Mhm.
is not something that we naturally intuit very well because we just have no real, we haven't had the space to cultivate that.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd say, I mean, maybe it's an unlearning. I don't know. I guess it depends however it is, whatever metaphor you like, but there is something about simply sunflowering.
I love this. And you use the word cultivate. Great word.
Yeah, it is something I think we cultivate, right? You cultivate the soil of the garden, you throw the seeds in, and you tend to it, and you have absolutely no idea what grows out of it.
And I had such a vision when you were saying that of, my I've got to produce something head was saying, wow, what if I did take 3 months maybe off? And that would give me time to return to my journal. I love writing. It's fun for me. So I would stay in touch with people. Maybe that my newsletter would be my connection.
Sure.
I know my students. We've got a close enough community, my Qigong online Qigong students. We've known each other, we've been through COVID together, and we're going through all the issues that we have as we grow up. I know that they're wondering about the same things.
Mhm.
And so, I have to feel like I'm not, hmm,
It
I
sounds
don't want
like,
to lose the connection with them.
yeah,
I want to keep learning and then have something to like I brought my tray of toys to Ivy Clausen. I want to present something.
yeah, yeah. Sounds also like you're interested in exploring the idea of what it would feel like to vacate or have a vacation from the expectation of destinations. So, for example, even with your students or your clients, I would suspect, as we all do when we're working with clients, that we carry around the expectation of what changes in them. We measure ourselves against our impact on them, right? Because that's your craft. They come to you and they say, "Hey, Chris, I'm
Yeah.
here. I'd like to kind of get there." And then you're a guide or a companion in some way to help facilitate that. Um, so you naturally measure yourself against their destinations. Are they healing? Are they feeling better? Is the feedback positive? Whatever it might be.
Yeah. Huh.
Sounds like there's even an opportunity for you to change how you're understanding your relationship to them.
Yes.
Are you the gardener or are you a feature of the garden?
Ooh.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like you just have so much territory to shift all of those relationships. I think what's so hard for people in their day to day is that they feel bound by maybe what we could call a more transactional narrative. It's like everything is about production, it's about yield, it's about expectation, it's about getting somewhere. They're being measured constantly against that, right? I mean, every facet of their life. Am I a good parent? Am I a good employee? Am I a good boss? And they're looking to all of these destinations for validation. The team did great. My kids are happy. My spouse likes me. Everything is a measure of their activity. And then the activity is overshadowed by all the measuring. You can't enjoy the activity. You can only really rejoice in the measuring in a way. And then you suffer, you thrive or you die by that measure, right? Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm secretly very jealous of the freedom to explore the terrain that has no destination and yet has lots of enthusiasm.
Wow, that's a nice, I'm writing that phrase down. That's a good intention, terrain that has no destination, but lots of enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's because I mean I feel it in you. You're an incredibly enthusiastic person. I energetically, you're very
Yeah.
lively. You can see there's just this very it's a kind of firecracker that's
It's a deficit and a superpower. I
yes.
am a fire element in
Yeah,
Qigong, and that means in Chinese medicine, you probably know this, it's like the fire element, the heart, very related to the tongue and talking. I love the expression, I love language.
yeah,
I get really excited about stuff and people feed off that. And that I feed off their changing when I enthusiastically teach them and they go, "Oh my God, you've changed my life." Blah, blah, blah." And that makes me feel great. So I think that's a very strong bond that I would have to say, I'm in a transition. I don't need them to tell me I'm my enthusiasm is worthwhile, is valuable.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I mean, but I sort of still do really feel in my heart of hearts, like I just love that. I love doing that.
yeah.
But there is that constraint of the pressure. When are you going to teach the summer workshop? Or are you available next Friday? Or can you, that's what I have to balance and find a way around.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we've been using a lot of nature metaphors and they're so prevalent in the Taoist tradition, a very naturalistic tradition, like others, like the indigenous traditions. It's interesting that we don't carry around these expectations of and very much in nature. We don't I mean, I don't go outside and curse the tree that it didn't grow an inch yesterday. I don't go outside and say,
Some
oh,
people do, Mark.
maybe
God
they
damn it,
do.
what's wrong with this crap?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
beans
I
on the
mean,
broccoli.
it's true, there is that, but there are some things that it seems that we give a pass to.
Yeah.
Or let's say we're more at we go at it a little bit easier. I don't mind that the dandelion has, or the flower has 8 petals and not 10.
Mm,
Oh, if it'd only be better if it had 10. I don't, like we don't seem to carry that around, but of course we carry those things around about ourselves. I would
yeah.
have been better had I done 3 classes that week or, you know. did this course for those people, um and
Yeah.
it's hard to drop that. It's hard to drop that story, right? It's hard to shed that narrative. It's so become such a it feels like we would almost become unwoven, like we're this fabric that's being held together by the weave of these stories.
Yes.
I understand myself this way. This is kind of the matrix of my experience. And what happens when the ones and the zeros start pittering off? What's left? Is it just a blank screen? Do I
Mm.
be in a state of inertia? Would I? It was like this for me when I started motorcycling. Um, I made a commitment to myself that it wouldn't be an activity of destinations, that it would be an activity of pure exploration. But I can tell you, every time I get on the bike and I'm not sure where I'm going, like, what do you think my mind does? Where are we going? You know, there's something inside of me that begins with this questioning of, well, Mark, we need to know where we're going.
Yeah. Well, because what if you take a great 3 hour drive to the coast or something, and then it's dark and you have to get back? So there is some practicality involved. It's like a natural, but that's
I don't even, it's funny because when it happens in my experience, my mind doesn't even go that far.
huh.
It doesn't even go to the negative outcomes. It just doesn't understand in its current matrix what it means to move, what it means to engage, to start, and let the moment just unfold. To
It's
to
it's improvisation. You're talking about a motorcycle
Yeah,
in.
yeah, it is improvisational, and it's hard to be. It would be like being in a jazz band. Your whole life you've used sheet music. The story's been very clear on the page. You've written that story, and it's the same habitual story that repeats itself, or at least the frame of the page is the same. And then all of a sudden one day you say, "What would it be like for me to just improvise?
Mm,
What would it be like to me to just play and riff and not and step beyond the page?" And that's such an interesting question. Um, and what's interesting, I think, about that question is you can't answer it from the recesses of your mind. You can't
right.
think your way out of that question because the thinking is the page. It's the habit of how you think about things, right?
Well, improvisation, the way I learned it, or the thing that resonated for me when I learned how to teach improv was it's a relational thing
Yeah.
that you move spontaneously in dance, let's say, or in music. You play spontaneously, and then you hear some other players making a little whoop in that direction, like then you can play off of that.
Yeah.
So in it's is really interesting thinking about this transition as an improvisation with the unknown. Ooh, because
Yeah.
you don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's not like you have to think your way or plan your way or be aware of everything that's, well, you do have to be aware. You have to be aware.
Well, I would say you actually have to be
But
super aware.
yeah, of what are the messages or what
Yeah.
are pathways that you weren't aware of.
Yeah,
You
what's unfolding in my experience? Because when you're in pattern or you're in habit or you're on the habitual music sheet, actually your awareness can actually drop off quite a bit because you're on autopilot or you're just in the habitual rhythm of doing what you do, right? So there's not a lot. It's like the difference between being in a car and a motorcycle. You cannot be on a motorcycle the same way you are in a car. It's and really feel grounded or feel like safe because a motorcycle demands a lot of attention.
mm,
There's just too much going on in your surround, and you're too unprotected to allow yourself to wander. In a car, it's so habitual. You can wander in a car a bit. Like your mind can kind of just sometimes, I don't know if you notice this, like you'll drive somewhere and your mind will just, let's say, be active that day. And you barely even noticed how you got to where you're going because you were just functioning unconsciously. It's very hard to do that on a motorcycle. There's something in improvisation that actually it raises your awareness. You gave the example like a jazz trio. You have to be very attuned to what the other players are doing because you're riffing off of each other.
Mhm.
So you have to be very alive in your experience to be improvisational. So when you're chopping wood and carrying water, really the subtext of that is be very alive to what is unfolding in your experience. So when
Yeah,
you're chopping wood, and I've chopped wood, and I've hurt myself chopping wood, um, you better be alive to what you're doing. Like the aliveness to what you're doing, the fullness of what you're doing, is where all of the nectar is.
you just gave me a great idea, I think.
Did I?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking, as a one thing I do is I prepare all of my classes. And the classes I teach the most often, like working one-on-one with a person, I don't have to prepare much.
Mm.
And when I first started teaching the Qigong, I really prepared a lot. I wrote it down. Now I just, I take about a half hour, 40 minutes per class or less. Sometimes it's as little as 20, 15, 20 minutes, but I prepare
Mm.
a process. What if I just walked in and improvised? I've never done that with a group of people, and I've certainly never done it after my 25-year hiatus from teaching dance. I had the idea of improvising a dance class, I think could be a lot of fun and
Cute.
great, but I haven't done it.
Yeah, it sounds magical. It's magical to watch kids improvise.
Yeah,
They're so good at improvising. You put a bunch of kids in a room and just a bunch of like unrelated objects, and they will build worlds out of it.
sure. That's such a great skill for people who are not kids anymore. It's
Yeah,
such an important skill.
it's a
And
huge skill. I think it was Lonergan that said something like Bernard Lonergan that's on creativity. He said something like creativity is when you take two things that are seemingly unrelated and combine them into something new.
hmm,
And there's something about that. Sounds like there's two things arising in your experience. There's this known craft of Tai Chi, sorry, of Qigong and dance. And then there's this new world of the unknown of like effortless action and improvisation that are seemingly asking you to plant together and to see what grows in that garden, um, which seems like just a wonderful opportunity.
yeah,
And particularly because no matter what grows, it'll be perfectly good as it grows in the sense that you don't have to hold yourself to account that it better grow in a certain way or there's some kind of potential negative consequence, which is what binds a lot of people, right? I better just do it the way I know because I need the tomatoes to come out exactly how the tomatoes should come out because everyone's expecting me to make sauce. um what a wonderful gift, you know
well, and I feel as we discuss this, because I haven't discussed this with anyone
Mm.
really who understands it from the same points of view that you understand it. As we talk about it, I'm thinking that is doable and fun and relaxing. And
Yeah.
that's really what I'm looking for is I don't want the pressure of like I've got to produce material, I've got to produce content, and it's got to be good because people, blah blah blah. People are asking for more dance. They're asking for improv when I do teach dance. And when in dance, they don't have to, well, some of them do want to learn exactly what to do.
Right.
But I think the seed of the experience they're looking for is the joy of moving freely to music. What's more fun than that?
Yeah, it sounds like for a long time you've been asked to come to the table with expert's mind, and
Mm.
now it seems like you're interested in recultivating beginner's mind. Maybe
Ooh.
that's a
Yeah.
and that's a very, I mean, that's a very Buddhist notion.
Yes.
But
I've never applied it to
to your
something that I
craft,
do with people.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
because
do it
it's
by myself, but not as a motivator or a group of people, getting people to move or learn together.
it's a really interesting full circle in our conversation because one of the things as a group, when we talk about growing through what you go through, this experience that we're kind of co-architecting is we've been mindful of showing up to the table as beginners in a
Mm,
spirit of mutual learning, not in a spirit of training, not in a spirit of kind of this didactic or instructional experience, but in the sense of mutual improvisation. So what is our job to simply facilitate a space that makes that more possible, which is what nature does on behalf of us, and which is in our nature, is it creates a space in which things grow.
mm.
I mean, I guess you could probably say that is nature. It simply creates a space in which things grow and change and evolve. That's nature. I've never really thought of how I would define nature, but it doesn't seem, that seems to be at least something close to right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. How do we make a space in which things can grow?
Yeah. I think that's always what you've been up to with your students, right? Is like
Yeah.
I'm somehow in the process of architecting environments in which things grow.
Wow.
Yeah, it
This is,
sounds like such a tremendous ocean of possibility about how you take all of these very wonderful skills that you've learned over time, these traditions, these practices, and expand the canvas completely about how they're, because there's something, it's interesting. Like, I don't know a ton about Qigong, probably know a little bit more about Tai Chi. Um, but all of these practiced movements, right, are embodiments of natural flows. They're personifications of things that move through us, around us, right? In the sense that they're not mechanical movements that we're learning to like. They're not surrogates to nature. They're expressions of natural movements, right? And natural flows. So one would think that they're enculturating in us the sense of being more in tune with the natural flows of our experience.
mhm. And the interest that I have also, as a body growing older and dealing with injuries, and my students gravitate toward this in me, is I'm interested in how maybe we can't do what we want to do anymore, but maybe we can if we know how to get back into it. The training of it, and that's where we get more like you work this muscle to do this action. But I find that interesting also because
Sure.
the human body is constantly reforming and re-architecting itself.
Yeah.
So, and that can come from like there's a movement in Qigong called dog wags its tail, where you shake your tail side to side. And I was explaining when I was teaching a dance move and I was working on, or when I was figuring out how to teach a dance move, and we're doing a lot of hip movements, like, oh my God, my back. And my students were saying, I really feel my back. That
Right.
it's not bad, but it's different. And that kind of a thing that you can then go back and say, well, here's how you keep your sacroiliac joints
Right.
intact. Or here's how you support your ability to get down to the floor and back up again. So, and I haven't really, I know that there are people who are doing this in the world of dance, or used to be. I'm not in the world of training anymore. I mean, as a student. Uh, but I don't know if I haven't seen it much recently. That would be, and that's good.
Yeah.
I like to train myself as a teacher by following the template of how someone else has done it and then letting it evolve on its own. But I don't know how anyone else has done this yet. So it's a really open field.
Yeah. It sounds like there's just a really open field of possibility. And I guess I feel like the invitation for us is always to step into it, which is a lot about what growing through what you go through is about. It's really
Hmm,
about, it's a field of possibility.
I see what you're saying now.
And then what's the,
What you're saying. Yeah.
just to simply embrace that, right? I mean, the funny thing about the present is that maybe what's so daunting to us about the present and why we're so distracted from it is that it always just holds infinite possibility. Because the present doesn't expect anything from us.
Yeah.
I mean, the dandelion is just dandelining.
Yeah.
The sun doesn't send a letter to the dandelion and says, "To whom it may concern, without prejudice, please note that I will shine as long as you will grow." That's not they, that's not the discourse. That's not the natural discourse. The dandelion dandelions, and everything just simply embraces however that dandelion is dandelining. And then things respond and adapt, and in that complex dance, just meet that dandelion wherever it is, right? The
Mm,
bumblebee meets it where it is. Everything just meets it where it is. Um,
mm,
I'm curious, in the growing through what you go through experience, we've decided to present these six lenses. Uh,
mhm,
the first one is story. The second one is time, and then presence, and then lightheartedness, and then beauty, and then love. So these are the kind of the six lenses through which we're going to invite people to take something like you and I have been dancing around, some unanswered question in their heart, something that's really they're curious about. Could be both something that they're really holding lovingly, something that feels like it has a hold on them. It doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't really matter. And then to explore it through these lenses. Like you already brought up a lot of, I mean, these are perennial lenses, right? Like, what's my relationship like to time?
mm.
What's my relationship like to lightheartedness, to a sense of just that open field of possibility? What are the stories that I'm holding about this experience? So, I mean, tactically speaking, we chose lenses that we know permeate a lot of our moment to moment experience. I'm curious, in any of those lenses, are there some that stand out more to you that you're more curious about?
Oh yeah, I mean it was like you could have planned this out ahead, ironically, because as
Right.
soon as he said, "Oh, you're going through a transition," it was like, "Oh my God, I am, aren't I?" Even though I know intellectually, "Oh, okay, I've got this possibility of," but I didn't ever think of I'm going through my notes that I took. I'd never thought that I don't have to stay in that story. I could completely step outside of it.
Mm,
And the heart of it, this discussion for me is that recultivating beginner's mind
mm,
and doing it outside the story of I have to be the teacher presenting this banquet of well thought out and presented meals for you. It's more like
let's sit down and
till
have,
the soil, you're the seeds. Let's see what happens.
yeah,
I'm going to be dropping this. I'm also a seed. We're going to. My experience can maybe help you out if you run up against a rock or something, or
mm,
maybe whatever. I
yeah,
could be more of a what's the word?
facilitator.
Yeah, facilitator.
Yeah, well, it's a nice word. It's Francis Lallemand, one of our lead facilitators, reminds us that facilitator comes from the French facile,
Facile.
to make easier.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And that brings us back to less effort.
yeah. Like the question, it's a very counterintuitive question. But if I emptied my cup and I showed up to my experience, what would fill that cup? Where
I mean,
typically the metaphor is I need to show up with this very full cup. It needs to be loaded with nutrients and stuff and stuff and stuff. And then I'm spreading it onto people. That's kind of the expert stance, is right. I have a very full cup. The knowledge is full, the well runs deep, and people are going to drink from that well.
interesting. This also very, very interesting. I was raised by my parents to always be selfless, 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 and I argued with them a lot about that. Like this isn't selfish. I'm trying to learn something here, or whatever. But I'm realizing what you described, showing up with an empty cup. I am open to whatever experiences the people I'm working with want to work on, as opposed to having this preconceived idea of the destination.
Yeah.
So it's the ultimately selfless, generous, creative way to appear as a teacher. You have to trust that you have the experience. If I don't trust it by now,
Yeah.
then I'm crazy because it's not saying I'm great at what I do. It's saying, how could I not have this experience? I've been studying this since for over 60 years almost. Shocking, you know. I got to trust that I've got this knowledge that most people don't have.
Yeah,
And
what is the expert's greatest move? I think the last big move of the expert is giving up the expertise. I think of that classic Zen archer metaphor. You learn the skill to unlearn the skill. There is a
yeah,
moment in the craft where the craft drops off and the experience unfolds. They even athletes who talk about being in the flow or being in the zone, there's no self-reflective behavior on the craft itself. There's only the experiencing of what is right in front of them, right? So the Zen archer isn't standing with the bow and the arrow thinking, okay, I should pull back my arm at 90 degrees and I should hold the bow steady. The craft has been so carefully honed over time that by the release is the drop off of the craft. There's
mm,
no bow, there's no arrow, there's no archer. There's just the experience unfolding. That's the mastery of being a sunflower, is there's just the sunflowering.
yeah.
There's
They
just
don't,
there's just dandelining. That's all it knows. And it's so masterful at that. Um, that's pure mastery, where the craft drops off. So it sounds like you've been readying yourself in a way for this moment where the craft, the conscientiousness of the craft, the expectation of showing up with the craft drops off, and then the experience, the field opens.
yeah. And I have so many opportunities to play with this that are being presented to me. So to think of it that way instead of, oh my God, another obligation, you
Yeah.
know, for me to
Yeah.
show up at that library workshop and not have a clue what I'm going to do, that would be exciting and fun.
Yeah, and maybe it looks something like just inviting your students and your colleagues or your friends to an open-ended experience without expectation. It's just like, let's, this is experimental. Like we're opening an experimental space. I would say in a way, even when people show up at Tai Chi or Qigong or whatever they show up with, coaching or anything else, they're secretly asking for this very experimental space. They're asking in a way the same
Hmm.
question that you're asking, which is, what is the thing I don't yet know? And what is it about this space that invites me to step into that? They're not showing up and saying, please tell me the thing I already know. They're going to be bored out of their minds in a way, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not here to tell you what you know. We're here to adventure into this new kind of territory together.
And I don't always know what they don't know. And
Yeah.
I sometimes give them more, like again, when mostly teaching dance, with this World Dance Jam, that's what I called it, that I taught for 6 weeks. I didn't know that it would be hard for people to understand a simple rhythm that I've been doing. So, you know what I mean? So it's like uh getting rid of those pre-expectations or those preconceptions,
It's
being
huge.
completely open. It is huge.
I've gone to workshops where, I have very specific objectives to mine. I'm trying to impart a certain blah, 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 and it goes sideways.
Yeah.
And your first instinct is, wait a second, this is going sideways, as though I was heading north and it wants to go east. And so there's a tension there, right? It's like, I want to go north, but why is this going east? And then there's some part of you that says, well, east is where we're going.
Yeah.
This
You know
experience
what?
is about going where it's going. It's not about, again, and that's not to say you can't learn a skill, right? Like, okay, I go to a cooking class or a Tai Chi class to learn Tai Chi. I get that. But I'm also going to open to what is possible. So where it's kind of the intersection of the craft, the pragmatics, with the expressive and the improvisational and whatever unfolds here is part of this process.
It's the play.
Exactly.
It's the play.
Exactly. It's
And
it is play.
here's something about Qigong. They don't in China, some people say I practice Qigong, but many people say I play Qigong.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And you know what, Mark? This is so interesting. When I was down in Puerto Rico, the couple that ran the inn that I stayed in, that we stayed in, the woman was a yogi. She was a Kundalini yoga teacher, and we started talking. And I loved the way she talked and spoke about what she did, and we used the same language. And I had this thought in my mind: I want to get together with her and another friend of mine who teaches yoga, and get all my students and just hang out and teach each other. And I was in my mind, I was envisioning what you've described, but part of me is like, oh, you can't do that. You have to, each person has to teach their thing, and there has to be a curriculum. And but what I wanted was just this soup of people getting together and asking questions and sharing what they do.
Yeah,
It would be fun. And I think my students would think that was fun too.
it sounds like you just have all this room to play. What you just described is what we call the importance of fellowship. It's a sense of creating spaces of mutual discovery. It's less about what we're teaching each other and more what we're discovering through each other.
Yeah.
So this, I hope that you'll experience this if we set our intention clearly in the growing through what you go through experience, is that it will be a lot about fellowship. Of course, there will be facilitators there to hold the experience, to companion the experience, and sometimes to lead the experience,
Mhm.
but also allowing themselves to be led, to allow the improvisational quality. It's an
Hmm.
interesting balance. I mean, even in improvisational jazz, there's kind of rules. There are chords, there are things that underlie the play, right?
Mhm.
The dandelion needs sun, the dandelion needs rain. These, you could say, these are kind of rules, or these are like the things that hold the experience together. And in the absence of those, there'd be no dandelioning.
Mhm.
And as those basic conditions are met, there's no taking for granted. We allow the improvisational, we allow the dandelioning to happen. Um, so there's a delicate balance there.
Yeah.
I mean, same with the archer, right? It's like there's a very specific craft. There's a kind of deliberateness in the movement. There's a meticulousness of the movement. And then when all that meticulousness is done, there's just the release.
Right.
It's that second part we don't jive with, we don't get as well in the West. We just don't understand when all things are done, the release. When all things are done, simply the experience, simply the dandelioning. Um, because
Mm.
we're so hell bent on the outcome of the technique, the outcome of the process, and the outcome. So we think that we cultivate the technique to control the outcome, and we
Mm.
only actually cultivate the technique to be in the experience. That I think is the link we don't, where we get, is the trap here. The trap here is everything is about outcome.
Yeah.
If I learn the bow and the arrow, I will hit the bullseye. No, if you learn the bow and the arrow, um, what you're really learning is the experience of release. And in the experience of release, one is much more attuned to the bullseye.
Ooh, right.
I think, in a way it sounds like that's somewhere in the territory of this paradigm shift that you're also going through, is what is the bullseye of my experience and how does that relate to this process? Where in the past, like most of us, most regular everyday humans, we feel obliged to try to control for outcomes, create that safety, right? Create that world of like control, and I'll be okay and I'll have my bills paid and my home will be fine. And everything is a measure against something.
Yeah.
And of course, the process then becomes very effortful because we're constantly under the thumb of our expectation of the outcome. And we cannot enjoy the process because we are only expectant of the outcome.
Well, what's the word? Is it the word enthusiasm, or it's something, a word similar to that? I can't, which means sort of like bringing in the light or bringing in the what's the word?
I can't think of it, but I think it's a beautiful metaphor. The
It's
enthusiasm of one's experience.
like bringing in the spirit.
Yeah,
And my true understanding, thing I know for sure as a teacher, is if I'm not enthusiastic about something, I could teach it, but it won't be
yeah.
received.
Well, they learn and love and connect through your enthusiasm. Like watching a dog be unfettered or a child be unfettered. That enthusiasm is so incredibly infectious because I think it speaks to something in us that wants to feel liberated in our own movement, in our own effortless action. No one likes to live under the pressure or expectation of constant generating some outcome.
Right,
It's nerve-wracking,
right.
right? It's literally nerve-wracking because there's something always chiming away in our ear that says it's not good enough, it's more, it needs to be this, it should have been that, it didn't go the way I wanted.
Mm,
We set ourselves up for our own disappointment.
right.
Yeah. Imagine what it would be like being a dandelion where you would have to carry around the expectation of growing in a certain way, of pointing in a certain direction, of looking a certain way. You could never possibly wilt. If the sun doesn't show up, you would be in a state of despair. Oh, the sun's behind the clouds today. I guess I'll just bury myself in the ground.
Yeah, look at that one's turning into a fluff ball, and I'm
Ex-
not.
Exactly.
What have
This
I
guy
done
over here
wrong?
he's dandelion better than me. She looks better than I do.
Yeah,
And I
people are
done it
looking for
this.
joy and joy. That to
Yeah.
me,
There
it
would be no
simmers right.
joy in dandelion.
Yeah.
Would be no, but that doesn't that sound like a very familiar narrative? I mean,
Hmm.
isn't that the narrative that 99% of us are carrying around moment to moment? I
Oh
should
yeah,
I was expected to, I didn't turn out the way I wanted, or it turned out the way I wanted, but now I want more.
yeah. That's not enough. I want some. It
Yeah.
can't be good enough if I've got it. So
Yeah.
we got to achieve this level.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to cultivate mastery in that because you're not in the craft,
Mm,
you're in the outcome. It's very, very difficult to be a craftsperson, to be masterful if you're not mastering the experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
I guess so.
I think I don't know about you, but the teachers I've always been the most fond of, the ones that they were incredibly craftful of just being in their experience. If I watch a Japanese tea ceremony or just watch someone incredibly good at their trade, I'm enamored by how lost they are in their craft.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the precision. No movement is wasted. You don't get the sense that they're ruminating about the future, they're not lost in some hypothetical because the craft demands their attention.
Right. They're completely absorbed. My dad was like that. He was a painter. He was an art teacher and a painter. And he would sit in his studio with his pipe, and I could see it. And he would paint. And he didn't care anything about selling his work. He said, no one could pay me for what I've done, for the love and the effort and the hours. He would give it away. And that made a big impression on me because my brother even made him a little side. He'd say, I'm in cloud nine when I'm in the studio.
Yeah.
So I thought, what a great, I guess I always had that in the back of my mind. That's a nice goal, to be somewhere where you're in cloud nine. I'm in cloud nine now. I really am. I
Yeah.
have nothing pulling at me except a story, a narrative of they need me because I've been doing this, or I have to do it this way because it's been successful.
Yeah.
So, but why not open up and play? That's what keeps people flexible. You have to stay flexible in your mind and your self-image and your
Yeah,
uh,
and their trust of you is the territory of play. I mean, that's you've been honing the craft of trust for a long time.
Mm.
And part of and maybe the next stage of the trust is the release, right?
Yeah,
You've been creating this very healthy relationship with these people, pulling back that arrow, and then feeling like we can trust that you will hold that arrow in place. And maybe the next stage of that trust is simply the release.
which gives me the theme for the retreat that I've got in mind. Um, it's really amorphous, but first I wanted to do it down in Puerto Rico, then realized it was not practical. The place is too small, but there is a place nearby.
Mm,
And in Ankrum, New York, if you're ever looking for a nice place to do a retreat, it's called Pumpkin Hollow.
mm,
And what a fun thing it would be to get my teaching friends together with my local students from the Northeast to just get together and see what happens.
huge.
Yeah, it would be huge.
Yeah. I mean, it's even in Qigong, right? I mean, movement and not movement, silence and noise. Everything is release and activation. We're trying to dance this dance, right? The expert mind, the beginner's mind. Um, I think as our craft matures, the craft is harmonizing these experiences, right? Every Tai
Mm.
Chi movement is an outflow and inflow. Um, and we're often in our day-to-day stuck in an outflow way of being in the world. Everything is what comes after the equal sign. Um,
That's a
yeah.
quote. That's a quote, Mark.
Is that a quote?
That's a
You
quote.
can quote
Everything
me.
what comes after the equal sign.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, look, there's a lot of that preoccupation. Um,
Yeah, sure is.
so look, how do you rebalance the equation? Where do we celebrate the 2 plus 2? Where do
Ooh.
we know the fours, we want fours, we try to create fours, we measure ourselves against fours, but how do we come home to the 2 plus 2?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you're joining us in this experience.
Oh man, me too. I'm excited about it now.
Yeah, I hope it will be eye-opening for people. I hope it will be heart-opening for people. I hope people will find it wonderful to just have a space to explore unexplored questions
It's
and not
great.
feel like they're being without any expectation, without, this is no one's being evaluated. This is not, a formal learning course. This is really a lot of discovery and inquiry and then mutual reflection and just simply seeing what grows when we allow ourselves to dandelion.
Well, if this conversation is a model of what this process will be, I think it's fantastic because there's nothing like this.
Oh, amazing.
There's nothing like this. And to my mind, and believe me, I've been looking
Mm,
and I just everything is in its own little corridor. This
yeah.
is what I teach, this is what I do. But to be completely open with just these six lenses, very interesting. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll feel probably a bit more like walkabout.
Hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I'll be there. I'll be there with our facilitators. And
Yeah, the first one is when I was
so
just
yeah, it's a good question. The first session, so the first lens begins in May. Every month, the way it works is every month we host a new lens. They follow a similar scheduling pattern. So we do a few weeks of exploring that lens. The first one starts May 6th. We're beginning with story. So the first lens will be story on May 6th.
okay.
For most of the sessions, they take place Mondays and Thursdays at noon Eastern for an hour
Okay.
and a half. And then in the fourth week of that month, we facilitate a transition session between lenses. So when
Oh,
we move from story to time, the fourth week of the month of May will be dedicated to talking about that transition into time. And then our
Excellent.
new facilitator will pick up in June on time, and then so on and so forth, all the way through to October. So
Oh,
people can, the lenses are both standalones, like you can just, people can just register for one of the lenses, or if they want the fuller experience and that continuity, they can register for all six of the lenses.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Is it already open to other people joining in? Like, could I invite other
Yeah.
people who I think
Yeah.
would be interested?
So we're doing a couple of things. We're hosting a couple of free what we're calling readying sessions in April. There's two of them. They're essentially, they're not the same because different facilitators will be present, but you can register for one or the other of them. I forget the exact dates, but they're on our website at peoplebeforepatients.com. I think one is April 23rd and the other one's the 30th. So that'll give people a kind of sense of what we're doing, and they can also ask questions. So we're going to facilitate a kind of micro experience on those readying sessions, and then invite people to ready themselves to go on this curious voyage with us.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a good place to start. Register for those. Or if people are ready to just kind of leap into it, they can also just ready for the fuller experience.
I'm glad you told me that because I wasn't sure what these sessions were, if it was just the facilitators sort of practicing and trying out stuff, or if you
No,
wanted to
they're
bring
kind
people
of,
in.
I mean, they've two, I guess they have two purposes. One is just to give people a sense of, when we talk about sense making or inquiry, like what is this? What's, kind of give them a taste for this curious voyage. What will this be like? So we're gonna kind of do a micro experience, and then they can all, people can obviously ask questions, whether they have very functional questions or pragmatic questions.
Wow.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm going to start telling my students about this, and
Oh, great.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they if they know I'm doing it too, that makes it more fun because they're like, "Oh, I'll see you there," that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
And we don't, and just for the sake of, people listening, it's a fee for service program, but we also have
Mhm.
scholarships available. So, we're operating this in two ways. If you pay, it's because you're donating to allow others to attend who can't otherwise afford it. And if you can't afford it, just let us know. We don't go through a whole there's no scrutiny, and no, if you tell us that this is what you can afford, or if you're really in a situation where you can't afford anything, we won't exclude anyone. Um,
Excellent.
so we have, um, every lens experience kind of allows for, we're allowing for 30 people in the experience.
Okay.
Um, and we suspect the spots will be taken up fast. Like, I think on average now we have just already about 6 or 7 people registered for each lens. And as we get closer, we
Neat.
suspect it'll keep growing. But yeah,
Yeah.
please do share. Um, and yeah, thank you for today. It was great talking with you.
Oh, thank you. Could I have a copy of this too at some point?
Yes,
Because
of course.
you
I'll
brought up
send it.
some really thought-provoking, interesting,
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'll send it over.
encouraging ideas for me. So thank you so much. And I'm psyched. I'll spread the word and try to get there on the 26th.
Okay, cool.
That's the first one
Yeah.
with them and bring some pals with me.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Chris. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good
we'll
to
talk
talk to
soon.
you.
All right.
Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.